You ever see your own mother walk into a courtroom and realize she's not there to hug you, but to take everything your grandparents left you? Yeah. That was the day I stopped believing that blood means love. Hey, I'm Emily Reynolds, and if you told me years ago that I'd end up across the table from my own parents in a courtroom, me, the kid they once left behind, I would have laughed and said, "You've been watching too many dramas." But life has a funny way of turning silent kids into storytellers and broken hearts into lawyers. So sit with me for a bit. I want to tell you how a girl who was once invisible became the woman who finally spoke up, and how one family's secret letters changed everything. My earliest memory isn't of a birthday or a Christmas morning. It's the sound of the screen door slamming and the smell of coffee going cold on the counter. I was maybe 4. Mum was yelling, something about freedom and I can't do this anymore. Dad didn't yell back. He just picked up his keys and walked out. And that was it. The air went still, like the world had exhaled and decided not to inhale again. I don't remember much after that day, just that I ended up in my grandparents' house a week later. Robert and Margaret Thompson, 2 names that would become my whole world. He was a judge, stern, quiet, the kind of man who believed that truth was a sacred thing. She was the soft one, the kind who'd hum old songs while baking, hands always smelling like lavender and sugar. They didn't have to take me in, but they did, without a word. Grandma just wrapped me in a towel after my first bath there and said, "This house doesn't do loneliness, okay?" And somehow, even as a kid, I believed her. Still, growing up, I always felt like I had to earn my place, like love was something you worked for, not something freely given. Grandpa worked late, always buried under case files, and I used to sit by the window, waiting for the sound of his car. Sometimes, when he came home past midnight, I'd pretend to be asleep just so he'd think I was fine, but he'd always peek in anyway, always whisper, "Night, kiddo," like he was apologizing in a language only silence could speak. Grandma, though, she had her own way of filling the quiet. She taught me how to plant tomatoes in the backyard, said the secret to growing anything was patience. "You water it when it's dry, and you give it space when it rains," she'd tell me. Funny thing is, she wasn't just talking about plants, she was teaching me how to love people who didn't know how to love back. For years, Mum and Dad were just voices on the phone, occasional "how's school" or "we'll visit soon." But they never did. They were busy chasing something that didn't include me, success, money, whatever filled the hole I apparently left behind. When I turned 12, Grandma got sick. Cancer, the kind that doesn't give you time to bargain. And for the first time, I saw Grandpa cry. Not loud, not messy, just this quiet tremor in his shoulders as he sat by her bed, holding her hand, whispering things I wasn't supposed to hear. The night she passed, I sat outside the hospital, staring at a vending machine that had eaten my dollar. It sounds stupid now, but I remember thinking, that's how life works. You put something in and sometimes you get nothing back. That thought stayed with me for years. After Grandma's funeral, the house went quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This one had edges, sharp ones. Grandpa started bringing work home, and for the first time, he'd actually talked to me about it, about truth, about justice, about people who think rules don't apply to them. He'd say, "Emily, fairness isn't about feelings. It's about doing what's right when it cost you the most." I didn't fully get it back then, but those words stuck like seeds in the soil of my heart. One evening, maybe a year later, I came downstairs and found him writing something. He was hunched over his desk, pen moving slow, deliberate. I thought it was another case. But when I looked closer, the letter started with "Dear Lisa." That's my mum's name. He didn't notice me, so I tiptoed back upstairs. The next morning, I asked if he mailed it. He just smiled and said, "Some letters aren't meant to be sent, sweetheart. They're just meant to help you say goodbye. I didn't understand that until much, much later." High school came and went. I wasn't popular. I wasn't the girl everyone noticed. But I worked hard, and I kept my head down, the way quiet kids do when the world feels too loud. When I got my acceptance letter to law school, Grandpa didn't say much, just handed me his old fountain pen and said, "Make it count." And I did. Because somewhere deep down, I wanted him to be proud. I wanted Grandma to see that her tomato plant kid had grown into something strong. But life doesn't stay kind for long. Just before my graduation, Grandpa passed away in his sleep. Heart failure, they said. Peaceful. But nothing about it felt peaceful to me. It felt like someone had unplugged the last light in the house. When I went through his things, I found a box labelled ER, my initials. Inside were old photos, newspaper clippings, and a folder with my name on it, and beneath that, a sealed envelope. The same kind of envelope he used for that letter to my mum. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there on his study floor crying in a way I hadn't since Grandma died, because I already knew whatever was inside would change everything. That was the night I decided. I'd read it when I was ready. I didn't know that ready would come the day my parents came back into my life, not with flowers or apologies, but with lawyers. And that's where this story really begins. You know that feeling when the past shows up at your door wearing a brand new smile? That's how it started. 3 months after Grandpa's funeral, I was still living in his house, sorting papers, finishing law school online, trying to breathe again. The house smelled like dust and old books, and every corner whispered his name. Then one afternoon, there was a knock on the door. 2 sharp taps, too confident to be a neighbour. When I opened it, there they were, Lisa and Jack Donovan, my parents. Or at least that's what biology says. I remember staring at them like they were ghosts. Mum had that perfect salon hair, a new handbag that probably cost a semester of my tuition. Dad had on sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. "Emily," she said, stepping in like she owned the place. "Sweetheart, look at you. You've grown so much." Yeah, well, 15 years will do that. They hugged me, kind of. You know those half hugs people give when they want to look affectionate but keep their distance? That was it. I could still smell her perfume, something expensive and fake, like citrus trying to cover up guilt. Dad just nodded, looked around and said, "House looks good." It wasn't a compliment, it was an appraisal. We sat down in the living room, the same couch Grandma used to knit on, now suddenly filled with strangers pretending to be family. They told me how sorry they were for not being around, how life had been complicated. I nodded, because what else do you do when the people who left you are suddenly talking like they deserve forgiveness on credit? Then came the real reason for their visit. Mum cleared her throat. "Sweetheart, your grandfather's estate, it's quite large, isn't it?" I froze. That's when I realised this wasn't a reunion. This was reconnaissance. They danced around it at first, talked about what Grandpa would have wanted, about family unity. Then she slid an envelope across the coffee table, a legal notice, a petition to contest the will. They wanted to claim half of everything, half of the home I grew up in, half of the money he'd saved for my future, half of what they'd never earned. I laughed, actually laughed, the kind of laugh that's half disbelief, half heartbreak. "Are you serious?" I said. "You left me." "You left him. You didn't even come to the funeral." Mum blinked, trying to look wounded. "We thought you'd need time," she said softly, as if manipulation could pass for compassion. And then Dad leaned forward, voice low. "Emily, you don't want to make this ugly. You're young. You don't understand how these things work. That's the thing about people who mistake kindness for weakness. They always underestimate what silence has taught you." I told them to leave. Mum's face hardened instantly. The fake warmth vanished. She said, "If this is how you want it, fine. But don't blame us when the lawyers come knocking." And they did. 2 weeks later, I was standing in a courthouse, ironically the same one Grandpa used to work in, reading my name on a legal document that said Defendant Emily Reynolds. It felt surreal, like I was walking into one of his old stories, except now I was the one on trial. They claimed Grandpa's will was influenced, that I'd manipulated him, that as a student studying law, I must have known how to make him favour me. It was disgusting. I remember reading their affidavit and thinking, how do you accuse your own kid of fraud just to pay off your debts? But here's where life started turning, because in the middle of all that chaos, I found the letter. Remember that sealed envelope with my initials? I opened it one sleepless night, hands shaking, heart racing like I already knew it wasn't just a goodbye. Inside was a single-page letter and a copy of a legal brief. The letter started with, "If you're reading this, kiddo, it means I'm not there to defend you anymore." So I did what judges do best. I prepared for the case ahead. He had anticipated this. Every signature, every clause in his will, every witness statement, airtight. He'd even filed a secondary affidavit explaining his decision to leave everything to me, not out of favoritism, but because, and I quote, "love is measured by effort, not DNA." He'd written it months before he died, and the legal brief attached, it was a roadmap for me, names of lawyers he trusted, the judge likely to oversee the case, his old colleague Elias Grant, and a note at the bottom that said, "Don't let bitterness be your lawyer." Let truth do the talking. I cried so hard that night I thought my chest would cave in, because it hit me. He knew. He knew they'd come back for what they never gave, and he'd still spent his last days protecting me from it. The next morning, I hired a small-town lawyer named Janet Morales. She wasn't fancy, but she was fierce. She read the letter and said, "Sweetheart, your grandfather was smarter than all of us. You're gonna be fine." Court started 3 weeks later. Mum and Dad came dressed like movie stars attending a charity gala. Their lawyer, slick, expensive, the kind who calls himself counselor like it's a royal title, kept throwing around words like emotional coercion and undue influence. When it was my turn, I didn't hide behind lawyers. I stood up, voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. I told the judge the truth, that I'd never asked for anything except their love, that the Thompsons had raised me when no one else did, that every book I'd read, every meal I'd eaten, every graduation photo, they were there, not Lisa and Jack. I could feel Mum's eyes on me, burning holes through the air. When I said, "They didn't raise me, they just left me," she looked away. Then Judge Grant, yes, Grandpa's old friend, leaned forward and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Miss Reynolds, your grandfather once told me the law can't fix broken hearts, but it can protect the people who heal from them. I think that's exactly what he tried to do here." I don't remember much after that, except the sound of the gavel hitting wood. Petition denied, will upheld. My parents left without saying a word, but as Mum walked past me, I saw it, just for a split second. Not anger, not shame, regret. The kind that comes too late to matter. Outside the courthouse, the wind smelled like rain. I looked up at the grey sky and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa." And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. That night I went home, sat in the garden, and planted a new tomato seed. Grandma used to say, "You plant when you're ready to believe again," and I guess I finally was. But that wasn't the end, because life had one more twist to throw at me, and this time, it wouldn't come from my parents, it would come from the past Grandpa never talked about. You ever win something and feel emptier than before? That's what it was like after the trial. People thought I'd be celebrating, popping champagne, calling friends, maybe taking a trip. But instead, I went home to a quiet house that didn't know how to celebrate anymore. I walked through each room like it was a museum of ghosts. Grandma's chair still had the dent where she used to sit. Grandpa's robe still hung by the staircase, as if he'd just stepped out for coffee. Even the air felt suspended, waiting for someone to say, "We're proud of you, kiddo." But no one did, because everyone who ever said it was gone. So I did what I always do when I can't sleep. I cleaned. I opened closets, drawers, boxes. I think I was just trying to keep my hands busy so my heart wouldn't collapse under the quiet. And that's when I found it. A folder wedged behind the old bookshelf in Grandpa's study. Dusty sealed with a paperclip and a sticky note that said, Private RT. I remember laughing softly to myself. Guess we're still doing secrets, huh, Grandpa? I sat at his desk, brushed off the dust, and opened it. Inside were dozens of pages, typed notes, case summaries, handwritten observations. It looked like an unfinished investigation. At the top of the first page, Lisa Donovan, case number 417B. My mother's name. I froze. My first thought was, no, it can't be. But the deeper I read, the more my stomach twisted. Turns out, years ago, long before I even graduated high school, Grandpa had started documenting a financial trail tied to my parents. Loans, fake business ventures. A joint account opened in his name without his knowledge. He had suspected them of forging his signature to secure a bank loan. And then I saw it, the bank's letterhead, stamped with one line highlighted in yellow. Co-signed by Judge Robert Thompson. Except, the signature wasn't his. I knew his handwriting. I'd watched him sign 1,000 documents growing up. This one was sloppy, the loops wrong, the ink uneven. He'd found out, and instead of pressing charges, he kept it quiet. Why? That question burned through me like acid. There were letters too, drafts he never sent. Some to the bank, some to his lawyer, one to Lisa. That one broke me. Lisa, I've covered for you once again, but I can't keep cleaning up your messes. I love you, but love without boundaries becomes cruelty. I'm saving your daughter from that kind of love. Maybe one day you'll understand why I sat there reading it over and over. Each line felt like a confession, a heartbreak, a man torn between duty and fatherhood. And suddenly I saw Grandpa differently, not just as a moral rock, but as someone who carried guilt, fear, and maybe even shame. He'd lived knowing his own child betrayed him, and he still found the strength to love me, the product of that same child, without letting bitterness poison it. I didn't even realize I was crying until I saw drops on the paper. Tears. Or maybe just grief finding a new way to speak. That night, I called Janet, my lawyer. I told her what I found. She came over, still in her pajamas, hair a mess, coffee in hand. We spread the papers across the table like we were building a puzzle. She whistled softly. He was gathering evidence, she said. This is a full-blown fraud case. He probably planned to file it, but something stopped him. Stopped him how? I asked. She shrugged. Maybe he thought it'd destroy what little was left of your mum. Maybe he didn't want to see his daughter in handcuffs that hit me, because deep down I knew that was exactly it. He'd chosen silence, not out of weakness, but mercy. And in doing so, he'd carried the weight for both of them. Janet looked at me and said, You know, Emily, you could press charges now. The evidence is valid. Fraud doesn't just disappear because the person's gone. I shook my head. No, he didn't want that. If he had, he would have done it himself. This was his cross, not mine. She nodded, quietly respecting the decision. But before she left, she said something that stuck. You're strong, Emily. But don't let forgiveness turn into silence. People like your mum count on that after she left. I sat there, staring at those papers until dawn. The birds started chirping outside. Same garden, same tomato plants. Only now I understood what Grandma meant when she said, everything grows from something buried. A week later, I packed the folder away in a lockbox and took it to my office at the courthouse. I was working as a junior prosecutor by then. My first real case involved a landlord who evicted veterans illegally. And I swear, every time I stood up in court, I felt Grandpa's presence. Not as the stern judge he used to be, but as the man who believed truth was worth protecting, even when it hurts. Still, part of me couldn't let it go. The file, the lies, the betrayal buried in those pages. I told myself I'd sealed it away forever, but secrets have a funny way of finding air. Because 2 months later, while prepping a new case, I got a call. It was from an attorney named Thomas Grant, son of Judge Elias Grant, Grandpa's old colleague. He said, "Miss Reynolds, I'm reaching out because some documents from your grandfather's estate have come to light. Something about an unfinished deposition. You might want to see this." When I went to meet him, he handed me a sealed envelope with my grandfather's initials, the same handwriting, the same heavy paper. Inside was a transcript, a sworn statement, dated just a month before he died. And the witness listed, Jack Donovan, my father. I felt my pulse spike. "What is this?" I asked. Thomas looked at me, hesitant. "Apparently, your grandfather was preparing to testify against your parents for fraud. He called your father in for questioning. It seems they met privately, and this is the record of that conversation." My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. It wasn't a confession exactly, but it was close. Jack had admitted to opening the account. He said Lisa needed the money, that Grandpa would understand eventually. And then there was a note in the margin, written by Grandpa himself. He still believes theft can be justified by love. Maybe that's where I failed. I closed the folder. For the first time in my life, I didn't know how to feel. Angry, sad, vindicated. All I knew was that the man who raised me had spent his final days trying to clean the mess his daughter made, and maybe in some twisted way, trying to save her soul in the process. Driving home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. If Grandpa was ready to expose them before he died, why didn't he? What changed? And that's when I realized maybe he'd left that answer for me to find. Not in papers, not in courtrooms, but somewhere deeper. In the one place I hadn't looked yet, the garden. You ever have that gut feeling like something or someone is trying to tell you one last thing? After I found that deposition, I couldn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see Grandpa's handwriting, his notes in the margins, those tiny circles he used to make when he was thinking. He'd been building something, not just a case, but a message. And I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd left a piece of it behind. Somewhere I hadn't looked. So one Saturday morning, I went out to the garden. It was quiet, except for the wind brushing through the tomato vines. Grandma's old scarecrow was still standing, half tilted, hat gone, a single glove hanging off like a wave frozen in time. That garden had seen everything. My scraped knees, my first tears, my first smiles after loss. If any place could hold a secret, it would be there. I started digging, not because I knew where to look, but because my heart told me to move my hands and trust they'd find what my eyes couldn't. After about an hour, under the old rose bush Grandma planted the year I came to live with them, I hit something solid. A small rusted tin box. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was another envelope, and on it, in faded ink, "For Emily, when she's ready to forgive." I sat there in the dirt staring at it, not sure whether to cry or laugh. Forgive who? My parents? Grandpa? Myself? Maybe all of us. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a letter, short, but every word felt carved into my bones. "Emily, if you're reading this, you've learned more than I ever wanted you to know. You've seen the cracks I tried to hide. I need you to understand something. I didn't press charges against your parents, not because they didn't deserve it, but because punishment without understanding just repeats the pain. Your mother made choices out of fear, not greed. Fear of being seen as a failure, fear of losing love she never truly understood how to give. I carried that fear too, all my life. You once asked me what makes a good judge. I told you fairness. But I was wrong. What makes a good judge is compassion that doesn't forget the truth. I didn't want you to grow up to be hard, Emily. I wanted you to be whole. If you ever find this, don't chase vengeance. Chase peace. Love, Grandpa. I don't know how long I sat there after that. The sun had moved across the yard by the time I realized my hands were covered in dirt and tears. Peace. He'd wanted peace. And all this time I'd been carrying his pain like a torch, trying to fight the same battles he'd already laid to rest. That night, I read the letter again, and again. Each time, the words hit differently. He wasn't telling me to forget what happened. He was telling me to outgrow it, to build something new from it. So I did something that would have made the old me laugh out loud. I called my mum. The phone rang 6 times before she picked up. Her voice was thin, weaker than I remembered. "Emily." "Yeah," I said, "it's me." Silence. Then she started crying. Not loud, not fake. Real, broken sobs that sounded like someone who'd been holding her breath for years. "I didn't think you'd ever call," she said. "I didn't know what to say. There's no script for forgiving someone who taught you what abandonment feels like." But I told her the truth. "I found Grandpa's letters," I said, "and I think I finally get it." She cried harder. "Emily, I was so scared. I didn't know how to be a mother. Every time I saw you, I saw everything I failed at." "I know," I said softly. "He forgave you, Mom. You should probably forgive yourself too." We talked for almost an hour. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't a movie ending, but for the first time there was no courtroom between us, just 2 people trying to build a bridge over the wreckage. After that call, I walked back to the garden. It was late. The air smelled like rain again. I lit one of Grandpa's old cigars, the kind he used to sneak outside with after dinner when he thought Grandma wasn't looking, and just sat there under the stars. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim or a survivor. I just felt like me. A few weeks later, I brought the letter to Judge Elias Grant. He'd retired by then, but still met me at a diner every other Friday. He read it quietly, folded it up, and said, "You know, Robert never forgave easily. But when he did, it meant something. Maybe now you understand why he admired you so much." I smiled. "He prepared me for everything except how to live without him." Judge Grant chuckled softly. "Then maybe that's your next case, kiddo." Learning how to live. That stuck with me, because the truth is, forgiveness isn't something you say once and move on. It's something you choose every single day until it feels like breathing again. In the months that followed, I kept working. I started volunteering at a mentorship program for kids in foster care, kids who'd been through the kind of silence I knew too well. One girl, Sarah, reminded me so much of myself it hurt. Quiet, brilliant, always waiting for someone to leave. I told her what Grandpa told me once. Fairness isn't about feelings. It's about doing what's right when it costs you the most. But this time, I added something new. And forgiveness. That's what you do when you're finally rich enough in peace to share it. Sarah smiled, and I swear, in that moment, I felt something click, like a full circle closing. That night, back home, I framed Grandpa's garden letter and hung it over my desk, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that love, when done right, outlives us. I still visit the garden sometimes. The tomatoes grow wild now, untamed, but they're strong. Every season they come back. And every time I see them, I think, yeah, we made it. But just when I thought everything had settled, when life finally felt steady, something unexpected happened. Something that made me realize Grandpa's story wasn't finished yet. A letter arrived in the mail, no return address. Inside, one line, typed on an old typewriter. Judge Thompson's files weren't the only thing he left behind, and beneath it, a key, wrapped in a note that simply read, Locker 112, County Archives. You know that quiet moment when you think life has finally stopped testing you, and then something whispers, not yet. That's exactly what that letter felt like. No return address, no signature, just a single line and a key that seemed older than time itself. Locker 112, County Archives. I stared at it for hours, tracing the rough edges of the metal, wondering if this was some kind of cruel joke. But deep down, I knew. Grandpa wasn't done talking. The next morning, I drove downtown to the old records building, the one that used to be part of the courthouse back when he still wore the robe. The place smelled like paper and history. You could almost feel the weight of stories locked away in every drawer, every filing cabinet. A clerk looked up from her desk when I walked in. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, holding up the key. "I think this belongs to one of your lockers." She squinted at it, then smiled softly. "Oh, those. Haven't seen one of these in a while. Down the basement. Storage level basement. Of course, because why wouldn't Grandpa's last secret be hiding underground? I followed the flickering lights down a narrow hallway until I found it, a row of dusty metal lockers, numbered in fading paint. And there it was, 112. The lock clicked open easier than I expected. Inside was a single box, wooden, heavy, no markings, just a small brass tag that said, "For the one who understands." My heart dropped, because I knew he meant me. I set the box on a nearby table and lifted the lid. Inside were 3 things. 1, a cassette tape labelled Thompson v. Donovan Drafter 2, a stack of legal notes typed on his old typewriter. 3, and a small leather notebook with a ribbon bookmark. The tape player on the table looked like it hadn't been used since the 90s, but somehow it still worked. When I pressed play, I heard his voice. Date May 3rd. Statement of preliminary findings regarding the Donovan matter. He clears his throat. If anything happens before this can be completed, I want it on record that I loved my daughter. But love cannot excuse what was done. The money she took was not mine to give. It was a trust for Emily, for her education, her future. She didn't just steal from me, she stole from her own child. If she ever hears this, I hope she understands that the real crime wasn't the forgery. It was the silence after his voice cracked then, just for a second. And I swear, in that tiny fracture of sound, I could hear everything he'd never said out loud. Then came a click. He'd stopped the recording mid-sentence. I didn't realize I was crying until I wiped my cheek and saw the smear of dust from the locker. Because it hit me. This wasn't just a record, it was a confession, a final judgment, spoken not from the bench, but from a father's heart breaking in real time. I opened the notebook next. Inside were pages of half-written reflections, not legal notes this time, but journal entries. Some dated just weeks before he passed. I keep thinking about what kind of world Emily will inherit. One where people believe justice means punishment and mercy means weakness. I hope she learns to hold both, firm in truth, soft in heart. That balance will cost her, but it will make her whole. There were doodles too, a rough sketch of our backyard garden, the tomato vines, Grandma's scarecrow. On the last page, 1 line, underlined twice. If she ever finds this, tell her, she was never invisible. That broke me, because that was the one thing I'd always been afraid of, that even though they loved me, I was just a replacement, the kid who filled a space left by disappointment. But those words, they erased years of quiet doubt in 1 line. I don't remember leaving the archives. I just remember sitting in my car for what felt like hours, replaying the tape in my head, his voice looping between truth and love and loss. That night, I couldn't help but wonder, why now? Why had someone sent me this key now? Who even knew this locker existed? So I called Thomas Grant, the lawyer who'd handed me the previous documents. When I told him what I found, he went silent for a long moment, then said, "Emily, I didn't send you that." My stomach sank. "What do you mean?" "You're the only one who had access to the estate files." "Not exactly," he said. "When your grandfather passed, a copy of his personal records went into restricted storage. Only one other person could have accessed them. Who?" He hesitated. "Your mother." I swear the world tilted for a second. "Lisa," I whispered. "Yes. She requested copies of several estate files years ago, But we never heard from her again after the trial, until 2 weeks ago. What happened 2 weeks ago? She called my office, said she wanted to make something right. That was the moment everything stopped feeling like closure and started feeling like the beginning of something else entirely. The next day, a letter arrived. This time it was from her, handwritten, shaky but readable. Emily, I know you found the key. I left it for you. There's something I need you to know before I go. I didn't steal from your grandfather because I hated him. I did it because I was drowning. I thought I could fix things before he found out. But I failed, again. He came to see me a month before he died. He forgave me, but he made me promise something, that one day I'd tell you the truth myself. I was too ashamed then. I'm not anymore. Please believe me when I say, he never stopped loving either of us. Mum, I read it 3 times before it sank in. He did confront her, he did forgive her, and all that time I thought he'd left that burden for me. Turns out he'd already lifted it. That night, I played the tape again, but this time I didn't cry. I listened, really listened, to the spaces between his words, the pauses, the sighs, the quiet mercy that lived inside his voice, and I realized something I'd missed all along. He didn't record that tape to condemn her. He recorded it to leave a blueprint for me, to teach me how to seek truth without losing my heart in the process. It wasn't about the case, it was about legacy. The next morning, I packed everything, the tape, the notebook, the letters, and took them back to the garden. I buried the box under the same rose bush where I found the first letter. Only this time, I didn't do it out of grief. I did it to let go. The world didn't change overnight, but I did. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe without guilt, love without fear, and stand in the truth without anger. That night, I whispered to the stars, "Thank you, Grandpa, for everything, for the lessons, the silence, and the love that outlived us all." And as the wind brushed through the vines, I could almost hear him say it back. "Night, kiddo." Funny thing about peace, when it finally comes, it doesn't feel loud or glorious. It feels quiet, like the moment after rain, when everything's still dripping but somehow clean again. That's what my life felt like after the garden. Not perfect, but peaceful. The kind of peace that doesn't erase the past, just lets you walk alongside it without bleeding anymore. It's been almost 10 years since that day. 10 years since I buried the last of Grandpa's secrets under Grandma's roses. And somehow life, the same life that once felt like a courtroom, finally turned into something softer. I didn't stay a prosecutor forever. After a while, I realized I didn't want to win cases as much as I wanted to guide people who hadn't even had a chance to fight theirs yet. So I started teaching, criminal ethics of all things, at the same law school I once walked through with trembling hands and coffee-stained textbooks. The first day I stood in front of a classroom full of nervous 20-somethings, I caught myself saying something that made me laugh inside. Fairness isn't about feelings. It's about doing what's right when it costs you the most. And just like that, his voice was alive again in mine. Some of my students still ask me why I left the courtroom. I tell them, because sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about prevention. It's about making sure fewer people ever end up in those courtrooms at all. They usually nod, half understanding. And that's okay. I didn't understand it either, not at their age. A few years ago, I met Sarah again, that quiet foster girl I mentored when I first started volunteering. Except now she wasn't quiet anymore. She'd just passed the bar. She walked into my office, all grown up, confident but still humble. She smiled and said, "You once told me forgiveness is what you do when you're finally rich enough in peace to share it. I think I get it now." That moment hit me harder than any courtroom victory ever could, because I realized this was Grandpa's legacy. Not the letters, not the verdicts, not even the garden. It was people. It was growth. It was the passing on of something good, one human heart at a time. Sometimes I still visit the courthouse, not to argue, just to sit in the gallery for a bit. One day, Judge Grant's son, Thomas, spotted me there. He said, "You know, my father used to say your grandfather was the only judge who could quote poetry and statutes in the same sentence." I laughed. Yeah, that sounds about right. Before I left, Thomas gave me a small envelope. Inside was a photo, black and white, edges worn, of Grandpa and Judge Grant standing outside the courthouse in 1984. On the back, Grandpa had written, "To Elias, may we never forget that justice is only half the job." Half the job. I used to think he meant the rest was paperwork. But now I know, the other half is love. A few months later, I got a letter from my mum. Not a sad one this time. She'd moved to a quiet town near the coast, started volunteering at a shelter for women starting over. She wrote, "I still hear his voice sometimes. The way he'd say, 'You can fix a mistake, Lisa, but you have to face it first.' I'm trying, Emily, and I finally think I understand what he meant about peace." I sat on my porch that night with a cup of tea and watched the stars come out. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the little girl waiting for someone to come home, because everyone who mattered was already here, in the lessons, the memories, the echoes of words that never really died. Last spring, I went back to the garden to replant. It's wild now, vines everywhere, roses creeping into the fence. I like it that way. Grandma used to say, "Things don't have to be tidy to be beautiful." Guess she was right. There's a new plaque by the rosebush now. It reads, "For those who learned that love and justice can live in the same heart." Underneath it, I buried copies of Grandpa's letters, the ones he wrote but never sent. Not because I wanted to hide them, but because they belong there where things grow. Sometimes I sit out there at sunset, the same way he used to, and I swear I can hear their voices in the wind, Grandma humming her little garden song, and Grandpa's low voice following behind, steady, patient. The two sounds blend like forgiveness itself, soft but strong enough to last. I think about all the versions of me that garden has seen, the little girl waiting by the window, the law student chasing approval, the young woman standing alone in court, facing her own parents. And now, this version, the one who finally learned that you can win without fighting and love without losing yourself. Sometimes, when my students ask for career advice, I tell them this story. Not the courtroom version, not the headline one, but the real one. The story of a girl who thought justice was about proving she was right, and who learned it was about making peace with what couldn't be changed. And when I finish, there's always this hush, the kind that happens when people feel something in their bones. Then someone always asks, "So what happened to your mum?" And I smile. She's okay. We both are, because the truth is, there's no final verdict in life, just choices. And the choice to love again after everything, that's the bravest one. As for me, I still carry Grandpa's old fountain pen. The ink's dried up by now, but I keep it anyway. Not as a tool, as a reminder, because that pen didn't just sign documents, it signed lives, mine included. And maybe that's how you know you've healed, when you stop writing endings and start living legacies. So if you ever find yourself standing in the wreckage of what used to be your family, wondering if anything good can come from it, remember this. Seeds only grow after they're buried. Pain can plant the most beautiful things if you let it. And me, I'm still growing. One season, one story, one heartbeat at a time.